Hello viewers, welcome to the series on business environment. The topic of this lecture is fiscal policy. This lecture is in continuation with the last lecture. In the last lecture, we had discussed public borrowings, public expenditure and deficit financing. The objectives of this lecture are to discuss the compensatory fiscal policy as well as the current fiscal issues in India. As highlighted by M.L. Jhingan, the role of fiscal policy for economic growth relates to the stabilization of the rate of growth of an advanced country. Fiscal policy through variations in government expenditure and taxation profoundly affects the national income, employment, output and prices. An increase in public expenditure during depression adds to the aggregate demand for goods and services and leads to a large increase in income through multiplier process, while a reduction in taxes has the effect of raising disposable income, thereby increasing consumption and investment expenditure of the public. On the other hand, a reduction of public expenditure during inflation reduces aggregate demand, national income, employment, output and prices. While an increase in taxes tends to reduce disposable income and thereby reduces consumption and investment expenditures. Thus, the government can control deflationary and inflationary pressure in the economy by a judicious combination of expenditure and taxation programs, and for this the government follows the compensatory fiscal policy. Let us discuss the compensatory fiscal policy in detail. The compensatory fiscal policy aims at continuously compensating the economy against chronic tendencies towards inflation and deflation by manipulating public expenditure and taxes. Therefore, it necessitates the adoption of fiscal measures over the long run rather than once for all measures at a point of time. When there is deflation in the economy, the government increases its expenditure through deficit budgeting and reduction in taxes. This is essential to compensate for the lack in private investment and to raise effective demand, employment, output and income within the economy. On the other hand, when there is deflation in the economy, the government reduces its expenditure by having a surplus budget and raising taxes in order to stabilize the economy at the full employment level. According to M.L. Jhingan, the compensatory policy has two approaches, and these two approaches are built-in stabilizers and discretionary fiscal policy. Let us discuss the built-in stabilizers in detail. This technique of built-in flexibility or stabilizers involves the automatic adjustment of the expenditure and taxes in relation to cyclical upswings and downswings within the economy without deliberate action on the part of the government. Under this system, changes in the budget are automatic, and hence this technique is also known as one of the automatic stabilizations. The various automatic stabilizers are corporate profit tax, income tax, excise tax, old age, saviors and unemployment insurance and unemployment relief payments. As instrument of automatic stabilization, taxes and expenditures are related to national income. Given an unchanged structure of tax rates, tax yields vary directly with movements in national income, while the government expenditure vary inversely with variations in national income. In the downward phase of the business cycle, when the national income is declining, taxes which are based on the percentage of national income automatically decline, thereby reducing the tax yield. At the same time, government expenditure on unemployment relief and social security benefits automatically increases, leading to an automatic budget deficit which would counteract deflationary tendencies. On the other hand, in the upward phase of the business cycle, when national income is rising rapidly, the tax yield would automatically increase with the rise in tax rates. Simultaneously, the government expenditure on unemployment relief and social security benefits automatically decline. These two factors would automatically create a budget surplus, and thus inflationary tendencies would be controlled automatically. The built-in stabilizers technique has both its advantages as well as disadvantages. Let us discuss the advantages first. The various advantages of built-in stabilizers technique are: the built-in stabilizers serve as cushion for private purchasing power when it falls and lessen the hardship on the people during the deflationary period. The second advantage is that the built-in stabilizers prevent national income and consumption spending from falling at a low level. The third advantage is the built-in stabilizers are automatic budgetary changes in this device, and the delay in taking administrative decisions is avoided in this technique. The fourth advantage is that automatic stabilizers minimize the error of wrong forecasting and timing of fiscal measures. The fifth advantage is that built-in stabilizers integrate short-term and long-term fiscal policies. The disadvantages of built-in stabilizer technique are: the effectiveness of built-in stabilizers as an automatic compensatory device depends on the elasticity of tax receipt, the levels of taxes, and the flexibility of public expenditures. The greatest of the elasticity of tax receipts, the greater will be the effectiveness of automatic stabilizers in controlling inflationary and deflationary tendencies. But the elasticity of tax receipt is not so high as to act as an automatic stabilizer even in developed country like United States of America. The second disadvantage of the technique is that with the low level of taxes, even a high elasticity of tax receipts would not be very significant as an automatic stabilizer doing a downswing. The third disadvantage of the technique is that the built-in stabilizers do not consider the secondary effects of stabilizers on after-tax business incomes and of consumption spending on business expectations. The fourth disadvantage of the technique is that this device keeps silent about the stabilizing influence of local bodies, state governments, and of the private sector economy. The last disadvantage of the technique is that they cannot estimate the business cycles correctly. At the most, they can reduce its severity. Their effects during the recovery from recession are unfavorable. Economists therefore suggest that built-in stabilizers should be supplemented by discretionary inflation policy. The other approach of compensatory fiscal policy is discretionary fiscal policy. According to M.L. Jhingan, discretionary fiscal policy requires deliberate change in the budget by such actions as changing tax rates or government expenditure or both. The three forms of discretionary fiscal policy are changing taxes with government expenditure constant. The second form is changing government expenditure with taxes constant. The third form is variations in both expenditures and taxes simultaneously. Let us discuss these three forms of discretionary fiscal policy. When taxes are reduced while keeping government expenditure unchanged, they increase the disposable income of household and businesses. This increases private spending, but the amount of increase will depend on which the taxes are cut, to what extent, and on whether the taxpayers regard the cut temporary or permanent. If the beneficiaries of the tax cut are in the higher middle income group, the aggregate demand will increase much. If they belong to the lower income group, the aggregate demand will increase much. If they are businessmen with little incentive to invest, tax reduction will not induce them to invest. If the taxpayers regard tax reduction as temporary, this policy will again be less effective. This policy is effective in controlling inflation by raising taxes, because high rates of taxation will reduce disposable income of individuals and businesses, thereby curtailing aggregate demand. The second form of discretionary fiscal policy is more useful in controlling deflationary tendencies. When the government increases its expenditure on goods and services, keeping taxes constant, aggregate demand goes up by the full amount of the increase in government spending. On the other hand, reducing government expenditure during inflation is not so effective because of high business expectations in the economy, which are not likely to reduce aggregate demand. The last form of discretionary fiscal policy is more effective and superior to the other two forms in controlling the inflationary and deflationary tendencies. To control inflation, taxes may be increased and government expenditure can be raised to fight depression. The biggest disadvantage of discretionary fiscal policy is that it depends upon proper timing and accurate forecasting. Accurate forecasting is essential to judge the stage of cycle through which the economy is passing. It is only then that the appropriate fiscal policy or fiscal action can be taken. Wrong forecasting may accentuate rather than moderate the cyclical swings. Economics is not an exact science in correct forecasting, and because of this, fiscal actions always follow after the turning points in the business cycle. There are delays in proper timing of public spending. Discretionary fiscal policy is subject to two time lags, and these are: First is there is decision lag, the time required in studying the problem and taking the action. The lag involved in this process may be too long. The second is once the decision is taken, there is an execution leg. It involves expenditure which is to be allocated for the execution of the program. In the developed country like USA, it may take 2 years and less than a year in UK. The third disadvantage is that certain public works projects are so cumbersome that it is not possible to accelerate or slow them down for the purpose of raising or reducing spending on them. Despite the higher multiplier effect of government spending as against changes in tax rates, the tax rates can be operated more promptly through it. Emphasis has thus shifted to taxation as the best fiscal device for controlling cyclical fluctuations. Thus, when the turning point of the business cycle is already underway, discretionary fiscal action tends to strengthen the built-in stabilizers, as has been experience of the developed countries like United States of America. Now let us discuss the current fiscal issues in India. Gerard, Lyons, Chief Economist and Group Head of Global Research at Standard Chartered Bank, in an interview on CNBC TV 18, said that with the commencement of the Indian budget for the year 2011, he sees India growing at 8 to 8.5%, with the fiscal policy adding to the country's inflation woes. And there is a need for further monetary tightening by the Reserve Bank of India or RBI. He has also commented that there is stubborn inflation in the system here in India, and it is more of a challenge than a problem. It is not a problem in the sense that the Reserve Bank of India has played its policy hands very well by withdrawing liquidity and by raising interest rates. However, there is a need for further policy tightening. The challenge is that the Indian economy does not have the strong momentum in all the sectors that it needs. Growth in the years 2010 and 11 may be somewhere between 8 to 8.5% and not 9% that the government seems to want or expect. Policy on the monetary side will have to tighten further. Wage growth still needs to be monitored and inflationary expectations need to be followed. What the Reserve Bank of India needs to avoid is the lethal combination of cheat money, liquidity and one-way expectations. They are withdrawing the cheat money by tightening policy. They have already withdrawn lots of liquidity. The one-way expectation that could return in terms of asset prices, less so may be the stock market, more so may be the property market. Further policy tightening is necessary in India to ensure that the inflation challenge does not become an inflation problem. According to Gerard, the fiscal policy side was anyway responsible for the Indian inflation scene. The budget was a good budget, but there are still further things that could be done. In terms of the 4.6% budget deficit, everyone seems skeptical about this figure. The revenue side in terms of tax revenue has been very buoyant, but to achieve that 4.6% budget deficit requires growth being strong and requires government spending being kept more under control than it has been in recent years. It is possible that it could be achieved, but it is not guaranteed. The aspects of the budget that still needs to be questioned are the composition. The 24% increase in education spending was very good. However, subsidies need to be addressed, that is fuel, food and fertilizers. There was focus on manufacturing and focus on infrastructure, but things could be more proactive even in those areas. In an environment where suddenly India starts to tighten monetary policy and in an environment where America loosens monetary policy and gives another fiscal injection, results in flows and investors returning to the short-term dynamics driven by short-term tactics. According to Press Information Bureau, Government of India, the high-level expert committee constituted by Planning Commission under the chairmanship of Dr. C. Rangarajan on effective management of public expenditure has recommended removal of planned and non-planned distinction in the budget. The report submitted to the Planning Commission on 2nd September 2011 also suggests that the process of preparing 5-year plan may be continued. Other recommendations by the committee are: the annual budgetary component of the plan of the centre and states will have 1-to-1 correspondence with the government budgets of the centre and states respectively. There should be shift in budgeting approach from a 1-year horizon to a multi-year horizon and from input based budgeting to outputs and outcomes. The shift to holistic view of expenditure would require changes in organizational structure, mandates and processes, as well as appropriate interventions in human resource development, information technology, etc. Broad definition of the role of Ministry of Finance, Planning Commission, administrative ministries and the state governments has been outlined. Planning Commission made responsible for consolidation of the 5-year plan overall services based on the inputs from the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance made responsible for the preparation of annual budget based on the inputs from Planning Commission. The committee recommends changes in annual budget process. On comprehensive framework of transfer to states, the committee recommends that the various problems or issues in the current budget and accounting classification in presenting comprehensive view of central transfer to state may be addressed through the new multidimensional budget and accounting classification by a committee headed by CGA. The proposed classification should provide uniform codes for central programs, sub-programs and schemes being implemented in the states. The Central Plan Scheme Monitoring System or CPSMS can be extended to enable tracking of expenditure for all central schemes using both treasury routes and society routes. This may require the interface of CPSMS with core banking solution of banks and systems of state. On treasuries and AG offices, the committee recommends that the citizen can also be empowered with information on flow of resources and utilization through a portal, thereby promoting transparency and accountability. On accounting concerns arising from direct mode of transfer, the committee recommends that the treasury mode of transfer of central plan fund is recommended. A suitable accounting methodology to be worked out by CGA and CAG to distinguish between final expenditure and transfer and to enable to view a final expenditure through the books of account. The switchover to complete treasury mode may be made from the 12th 5-year plan for all new schemes. A short transition period is required to allow for necessary adjustments for the existing schemes. Till complete switchover is done, accounting and submission of utilization certificate under the society mode should be rationalized. On revenue capital classification, the committee recommends that revenue capital classification should continue. Capital expenditure should relate to creation of assets and be determined by ownership criteria. While all transfers should be treated as revenue expenditure in accounts, the merit of classifying revenue expenditure by end use is also considered by FRBM compliance, and grants for creating assets may be classified as capital grant. An adjusted revenue deficit is recommended only for the purpose of FRBM compliance. FRBM may require some amendments to allow for adjusted revenue deficit. On scope of public sector plan, the committee recommends that the central or state plan should continue to include investment outlays funded by IEBRs of CPSCs and SPSEs respectively. Consolidated information on the resources and expenditure of rural and urban local bodies may be provided as special supplement of the budgets. The budgets and accounts of the implementing agencies should be shown as supplement to the budgets till funds are transferred through direct route. As regards PPP, the annuity commitments may form a part of committed expenditure of the budget of the concerned ministry or department, and annuity payments may be treated as capital expenditure. Viability gap funding is a grant provided to concessionaire of the PPP projects and may be treated as capital grant. There should be supplements to the budgets providing project-wise, ministry-wise and sectoral-wise information on the PPPs. It is important to keep in mind that the Indian government, in order to curb deficits, should not try and cut expenditure but instead focus on growth. This growth is important because it will generate more tax revenues. It is a fact that politics play major role than the economics in the framing and implementation of the government policies. Such activities should be checked and the most beneficial decision for better economic situation should be taken into account. The government cuts on capital expenditure and not revenue expenditure, making future economic growth of the country shaky. It must skillfully control the expenditure. Thank you.